for one. And okay, and that one is giving me the trouble that it has been for a while. Okay, so let me turn here. And
that's working, Kimberly. We can see your desktop.
so what I need is for it to go into, there we go, except now it's showing you in presentation. So let me see. Yay. Okay. All right. Okay. Now that that's the thing that made me the most nervous coming into this. So we're good. Okay. So thank you very much. And good afternoon, everyone. I am so pleased to have been invited to present to all of you today. This is one of my favorite subjects to talk about. So my name is Kim McHugh, and I am the Chief Science Officer here at Desert Botanical Garden. And I have oversight responsibility for two departments here at the garden. One is the Research, Conservation, and Collections Department, and the other is the Horticulture Department. And both of those are actually important in what I'm going to be talking about today. My background is my undergraduate degree is in education, actually, with major in biology. And I was a high school science teacher for many years. And then I went back to graduate school and got my PhD in biological sciences with an emphasis in ecology and evolution of rare plants. And from there, I worked at Missouri Botanical Garden as a conservation biologist. And then I did about a 3-year stint at Vanderbilt, where I went back into my educator mode and helped launch what's known as the School for Science and Math at Vanderbilt, which is for outstanding math and science high school students in the Nashville Public School District. And that program continues to this day. It's something I'm very proud of. And I've been here at Desert Botanical Garden for 12 years. I just had my 12-year anniversary on December 30th. So that's me. So getting into the subject of the talk, we're going to begin with a little bit of participation. So be ready to unmute yourselves briefly, because I would like to start by asking everyone a question. And the question is, would you please name an endangered animal?
Oh, the Gila monster.
Gila monster. Okay. Yes.
Tigers.
Tigers. Absolutely.
Polar bears.
Polar bears. Yep.
Rhinoceros.
Yes. Rhinoceros.
Elephants.
Elephants. Yep.
Jaguar, at least here in Arizona.
Yes. Absolutely. Anybody else? One more.
I think I just read that something like 80 or 90% of the current animals are going to be extinct.
That's a really dire prediction, but it's interesting that that is a statistic that you're aware of. So very good, everyone. My second question is, would you please name an endangered plant?
Might the saguaro be endangered here in Arizona and in the Sonora area?
So it is definitely a protected species here in Arizona, but technically it is not endangered, which is a good piece of news, but that's a good guess.
Yeah, I don't know any endangered plants in Arizona, but there is the Native Plants Act, right? That protects certain plants like the saguaro, so you can't chop them down.
That's true. That's true. And that's right. That is one of the protections for saguaro, is that you cannot just go out in the desert and typically knock them over with a pickup truck and then haul them off to So, yeah. Okay.
I
Anybody?
think most things in my garden, any plant in my garden is endangered.
Very good, Darlene.
But at least you're trying. At least you're trying. Okay, well.
I won't answer.
Okay.
So isn't the Canelo Hills ladies' tresses or something like that endangered?
Oh my gosh, it is. I have to ask, how do you know about it?
Because I used to work in the area of protecting endangered species.
Nice, very nice. I'm actually going to talk about that species. So let me say that collectively, all of you did better than most people that I ask these questions to. Usually when I say, well, first of all, no one ever has a problem naming endangered animals. In fact, the longer I let it go on, the more examples I'll get. When I ask people to name an endangered plant, it's usually sort of deer in the headlights and crickets chirping. So you guys did a little better than that. So here's a little bit of information for you about endangered species and endangered plants. So I wanted to give you a little bit of background about this. The term endangered species gets bandied around a lot on social media, in the press, and just amongst people, talking about things. And it's totally fine. And I think anybody who uses the term either endangered or threatened species, or even rare species, in their mind has some sort of thought about what that means to them. But when asked to define it, it gets really difficult. And so I wanted to bring to your attention the Endangered Species Act. I imagine most of you have heard of that. It was signed into law in 1973 during the Nixon administration. And it was then considered, and still is considered, to be one of the most amazing landmark pieces of environmental legislation ever enacted anywhere in the world. And under the Endangered Species Act, both plants and animals can be afforded protection. And the act itself is pretty lengthy. I'm going to boil it down to its essence, and that is, if a species is going to be afforded protection under the act, and it is quite a process to get there, they will be put into one of two categories, either threatened or endangered. If they're in the endangered category, it means that that species is in danger of going extinct. If they're in the threatened category, it means that that species is in danger of becoming endangered. So when I or someone in my field talk about a threatened or endangered species, very often we're using this legislative definition and designation. Now, does that mean that there are not any other species not protected in the Endangered Species Act that are endangered or threatened? No, there are many, 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 many species that would qualify by the criteria, but it is quite an effort to go through the process. It's an incredibly lengthy process to get something listed under the act. So now, having shared that little bit of information with you, I also wanted to note particularly that you'll see that as of yesterday, these are the stats from February 2nd, 939 species of plants are protected under the Endangered Species Act. 723 animals are. So plants outnumber animals. And this has been the case for as long as I have been in the field and looking at these statistics. And generally speaking, this carries out around the world. And I will say that, you know, this is in the United States, what we have designated. And we actually have, under the Endangered Species Act, species that do not occur in the United States, which is very interesting, but that we will afford protection to. Other countries have similar kind of laws. Mexico is one of them. There's is called NOM 59. I've never figured out why they call it that, but they have similar designations and protections for species in that country. And by and large, it's plants that outnumber the animals. So something to keep in mind. So today, what I want to do is talk about what we're doing here at Desert Botanical Garden to protect and conserve just a few of these many listed plants. And to be honest, it has to start with the people. And so these are some of the members of our team here at the Desert Botanical Garden who, through their research, work on the ground, and work here at our institution, are making real impacts in protecting and conserving many endangered plant species, both here in the state of Arizona and throughout the Southwest. And so where are we going to start? We're going to start with orchids, which, so at least one of you is very familiar with the fact that there are, one, orchids in Arizona, and that at least one of them is endangered and protected in the Endangered Species Act. For most people, hearing that we at Desert Botanical Garden are concerning ourselves with orchids, it's quite a surprise. Like, why? Desert Botanical Garden and orchids? It doesn't seem to compute. But the reality is that we have quite a number of native orchids here in our state. Right now, there are 30 known species, and these are just a few of them. One thing I did want to note, though, is that the orchid species that occur here in Arizona are not the showy, big, flashy orchids that most of us are familiar with, and certainly not like the ones that you might see in a florist or in the floral area of a grocery store. These are more cryptic, they're smaller, but nonetheless, they are important, they're special, and contribute to the ecosystems that they occur in here in the state. I wanted to make one note because I think it's really interesting. The orchid that's on the left of the screen, the red one, that's actually a parasitic orchid. So it has no chlorophyll, it doesn't photosynthesize, it relies on tapping into the roots of trees to get its nutrients. What you're seeing is the flowering part of the plant. And when it's done flowering and setting seeds, it goes back underground. So there's large parts of the year that you wouldn't even see them. So when you do see them, it's kind of special. Now, another thing I wanted to note is that we have many people here, as I said, who are working on conservation of threatened and endangered plant species, but nobody does it alone. No individual can do this work alone, and no institution can do it alone. And so when it comes to our work on orchids, we are part of a collaboration called the North American Orchid Conservation Center. And this is a collaborative that was started by and is coordinated out of the Smithsonian Institution. And you'll see there are quite a number of organizations that are a part of this collaborative throughout North America. And that includes into Canada. And I'll also note, you'll see Alaska is there. Alaska has an insane number of orchid species. So I think that's another place that a lot of people would never guess that you would find orchids. But you'll see Desert Botanical Garden down there in Arizona in the Southwest. And not only are we a partner within NAOC, as the acronym is pronounced, NAOCC, we are also designated as the orchid seed repository for the Southwest. So here we go. Here we are, for Mary. Spiranthes delicescens, Canelo Hills ladies trusses. This orchid is, as I said, it's protected under the Endangered Species Act. It is considered endangered. It is also endemic to the state of Arizona, which means it is known only from our state and no other place in the world. I think it's a beautiful little orchid, and it's a very special one. It is found, found, as I said, it's known only to occur in the state of Arizona, and only far down in the southern part of the state. On the left, you can see that black circle, and then on the right is an topographical view of where we currently know these orchids to occur. There's 2 red circles. Now, in the past, there were more populations that were known, and actually about 20 years ago, there was a real focus on this particular orchid, and annual surveys were being done. And we have a lot of data from that period. We know where they were, we know how many there were, et cetera. And then that effort dropped off. And I don't know exactly why. I have a feeling partly due to funding. We got involved back in 2015. And in that year, I was part of a group that went out searching. We went to several of the historically known sites, and we found none. And it was pretty sad. In fact, the Fish and Wildlife Service person that we were with said to me at the end of the time that we had been doing all of our searching, she said, "Kim, what am I going to do?" She said, "I'm supposed to write the recovery plan for this species, but if we can't find any, then what?" And I said, "Well, first of all, don't give up. This was one time, for the first time in a long time that anyone's come out looking. We'll try again next year." And indeed, the following year, it was 2 other staff people here from the garden who went out, and they did find some plants, and they found them at this. I don't know if you can see my cursor on the screen. I guess you can't. Let me see. Oh, here we go. Can you see that? Maybe you can't. The red circle that's higher up on that map, it's a place called Turkey Creek. It's actually private property, and the 2 people that went down there, Andrew and Steve, they were able to make contact with the landowners. The landowners gave them permission to come out on the property, and they found the plants. So it was the first time in many, many, many years that anyone had seen or documented the existence of this particular orchid. And it was a very exciting day when that happened. And since then, more recently, they have found plants at the second location, which is down farther south on the screen at a place called Sheehy Springs. So one of the things that we're doing now that we've found plants again is we are collecting seeds. And so on the left is a picture of the plant when it's in fruit. And we collect the seeds in these little glassine envelopes, and the little dark area that you can see there is actually thousands of seeds of this particular orchid. We have to collect them in these little glassine envelopes. Usually we use paper coin envelopes to collect our seeds, but because of the nature of orchid seeds, static electricity, which will build up in these little paper envelopes, makes it next to impossible to get them out or deal with them. And so we have to use these special envelopes. So now I'm going to give you a little lesson in seed biology. So Steve Blackwell, who is our conservation collections manager, he has, I think, one of the best descriptions of what a seed is of any that I have ever heard. And he describes seeds as a baby plant in a box with its lunch. It's perfect. except for orchids. It does not accurately describe orchids. So on the right hand of the screen with the pencil, those are orchid seeds. So you can get a sense of the size of these seeds. And then on the left are a couple of scanning electron microscope images of an orchid seed. So the one thing that Steve's description of a seed gets right is that there is a baby plant. And so in that top photo where it says A, that green blob in the middle, that's the baby plant or the embryo of the orchid. But then the box part, the baby plant in a box. Well, most seeds are pretty rigid. I'm not going to call them solid structures per se, because they do have little pores. I mean, because eventually water has to get in there, but they're much more substantial than what encases an orchid embryo. It's more like a little mesh bag. And I think that's pretty obvious in this micrograph. But also, there's nothing but the embryo. So that third part of Steve's description, the lunch, the baby plant in a box with its lunch, there's no lunch here. The technical term for the lunch is the endosperm. It's nutrients that are in the seed that that baby embryo uses to start to grow, to push out of the seed and to produce its first baby leaves. Because it needs that energy to get those baby leaves out to then start photosynthesizing and make its own food. It's kind of like the yolk in an egg. So a baby chick developing feeds on that yolk nutrients, same thing in a seed, but orchids don't have that. And so how on earth do they start to grow? Well, they have to form a relationship with a fungus. And it's through the fungi that they gain the nutrients they need to germinate and to grow. So when we go out and we're collecting seeds, we're also collecting root samples, because that's where the fungus that the orchids have formed this relationship with are housed, if you will. And so we send those root samples off to the Smithsonian, where people there will try to isolate and culture or grow the fungus. And it was not until just this past year that they successfully isolated and were able to grow out the fungus that the Spiranthes delicescens or the Canelo Hills Ladies Tresses orchid is using in the field in that symbiotic relationship. So we're very excited about that. But in the meantime, how can we try and grow these orchids if we don't have the fungus? So this is how we do it. There's another tool in our toolbox, and that is to use tissue culture. And tissue culture is a means by which you can take a part of a plant or a seed and you put it in a sterile medium. And in that medium, there are nutrients, there's water, and there are hormones that can help stimulate the growth of the plant. And so that's another thing that Steve Blackwell here has been working on, is using these tissue culture method to germinate some of these orchid seeds that we've collected. And this photo is from just a few months ago. He was so excited, he texted it to me and he said, guess what this is? And I said, orchid? And he said, yes. So this is the first success of germinating orchid seed in the tissue culture medium that he's developed. And those little fuzzy things you see coming out of the green stuff, those are what the baby orchid is using to extract the nutrients from that sterile media. The reason it has to be sterile is because if it wasn't, with all those nutrients and stuff in there, bacteria and other fungus would start to grow and it would kill the plant. So we have to do this in a really, really clean way. So, so that's one of the challenges with orchid conservation, is this orchid fungus symbiosis. And this is, like I said, we're working on two fronts to isolate the fungus that's needed for these orchids, and then also using this second method for growing the plants out. Another challenge that we have with this particular species is that they're so hard to find when they're not flowering. And so this is a photo we use to say, can you see the Canelo Hills Ladies Tresses orchid? Yeah, I see at least one person shaking their head. Yeah, neither can we. This is just a photo to say, this is the kind of thing that we're looking for. I mean, it's literally the needle in a haystack. And here it is out in the field. So on the right, you can see it, it's a flowering stalk. And then in the bigger picture, that little red circle, that's circling that plant on the right. So that's what people are looking for out in the field in the flowering season. That's the only way that we have to find them. It's just impossible if they're not flowering. But here's the thing about that. It's a big area that we have to look through. And this is from last summer. And you can see there's quite a number of people out there in the field, and there's actually more that were there not in the photo, scouring this rather large potential habitat area to try and find this orchid. Now, the good news is that in this area, they found 80 plants, which was tremendous. The bad news is, I mean, how many do you think we might have missed? We might have missed them because, well, they're tiny. And I mean, you saw the picture of what it's like even when they're flowering in the field. And what about if they weren't flowering yet? So here's the next thing that we're going to be trying. We've received funding from the Fish and Wildlife Service, and we are going to work with dogs. So as we know, dogs are used for many different jobs because of their keen sense of smell. And there is a company called Canine Incentive that's based in Southern California. They train their dogs for use in ecological jobs. And so this is a trainer that we're working with, Laura Lee Oliver, and this is one of the dogs, Vector. And one of the things that they do with the dogs, actually a number of things that they do with these dogs, they'll go out to where there are wind farms and they will search for birds that have been killed by the wind turbines. So that's one way we know the impact on birds. Searching for turtles, searching for an endangered cactus, the Pima pineapple cactus these dogs have been used for, searching for kangaroo rats, searching for even a fungus, the sudden oak death, Phytophthora. And so now we're going to hope that the dogs can help us find the orchids, because theoretically, they won't need them to be in flower. They won't need to use visual cues. They'll be able to use scent. And so to kick this off, first we have to give them material to work with. The Canelo Hills Ladies Tresses is really, really rare. So we're going to use a closely related species to help train the dogs. This is the Ash Meadows Ladies Tresses that occurs in Nevada at the Ash Meadows National Wildlife Refuge. So we have permission to collect some of these plants, which will then be shared with the trainers, and they'll train the dogs on that scent. And then hopefully we'll take them out in the field, first to the place of that more common orchid that they will have been trained on. If they're successful in finding those plants in the field, then we'll take them to the Canelo Hills Ladies Tresses habitat and see if they can help us locate more of those orchids in the field, so that we can take more pictures like this and collect more seeds and more fungus and keep this plant going. The second story that I wanted to share with you is about a cactus, an endangered cactus. It's known as the Arizona hedgehog cactus. It is an absolutely beautiful cactus. It's in a group of cactus known as the claret cup cactus. And I think you can see why it has that name. And this is a cactus. It is also protected under the Endangered Species Act. It is designated as endangered, and it also is an endemic of the state of Arizona. So it's only known to occur here and nowhere else. And in fact, it occurs quite near to us or at least those of us here at Desert Botanical Garden. You can see this photo. The bridge is going to become relevant, but you can see out by Highway 60, out by Globe, also Superior, which doesn't show up on the map, but nonetheless, this is the known habitat area and the range for the Arizona hedgehog cactus. Now, the reason that the bridge is relevant is because that bridge was determined several years ago to be in an irreparable state. And so it was going to need to be completely replaced with a new bridge. However, those canyons there are prime habitat for the Arizona hedgehog cactus. And they were going to be demolishing that bridge, blasting out some of those cliff sides to build the new bridge. So we had the opportunity to come in and salvage the Arizona hedgehog plants that are occurring in the area that was going to be impacted by the demolition of the old bridge and construction of the new bridge. And I will say that it is because of the Endangered Species Act that this opportunity came along, because when something that's going to be federally funded, like this bridge project, has the potential to impact a listed species, then the entities that are going to do the project, they have to enter into something that's called the Section 7 consultation, which means they have to do a complete study about what the impact's going to be and what they can do to mitigate those impacts to the species that's going to be impacted. And so in this case, ADOT, Arizona Department of Transportation, had to meet with Fish and Wildlife Service to go through that whole process. And we were invited to be part of those discussions. And so a multi-year plan was developed, and it began with a salvage project, which we did back in 2018 to collect all of the hedgehog cactus that we could find in the impact zone of this bridge project. Now, I said it's cliff sides. This is a picture of one of the cliff sides, and one of our staff, Raul Puente. Raul, amongst his many, many talents, is a very experienced spelunker, a caver. And because of that, he knows how to rappel. So he trained other members of our staff in rappelling techniques so that they could go out and salvage these plants. That is a single plant that you see in the photo there. This is a cactus known as a multi-stemmed cactus. And they can have, as the smallest plant, of course, they have one stem. We've had plants up to 60 stems. So the plants can become quite large. So this is Steve Blackwell again, also part of the team salvaging, and you can again see the kind of terrain that these cactus are in and what our staff were doing to salvage the cactus. You can also see this particular plant is wrapped in kind of a cellophane material. That is to hold all of those stems together. We don't want the plant to break apart when we dig it out. They're not very deep rooted, as you might imagine. So we want to get as much of the root as we can and hold those plants together. And then once they dug them out, this is how they got them up top again, is they'd wrap them first in the plastic, then in burlap, and then use various means. Sometimes they had them on their backs. Sometimes they put them in these little sleds and would haul them back up to the top of the cliff. And then what? That's the question, right? Then what? Oh, and here's just one more. So this has the bridge in it. So you can see the proximity of these plants to the bridge that was going to be demolished. So we brought them here. We brought them back to the garden and we planted them out. Now, some of them are in pots, but many of them we literally put into the ground because we knew we were going to have them here for several years. And the best place for a plant is to have its roots in the ground. So this is one of the salvaged plants from that Pinto Creek area. And what are we doing with them? Well, we're waiting for them to flower. And when they do flower, then Steve does hand pollination. So in this series of photos, he's collecting pollen from flowers on one plant, and he's going to put the pollen in that little tube. And then he's going to use that pollen to pollinate flowers on a different plant that we salvaged to hopefully produce seeds. And indeed, so here's that plant he was working on in the previous photo. Once he's done the pollinations, he puts little bags on the flowers to exclude any other pollinators. And he's tagged them so he knows who the parents are of any seeds that might be produced. And on the right, those are the fruits that were produced from that particular plant and the pollinations that were done. And then from there, we have to collect the seeds from those fruits. And then we plant them out to grow more plants. So this is all part of the grand plan that was worked out with Fish and Wildlife Service and ADOT many years ago. One is we'll collect, we'll salvage those plants in the impact zone. 2, we'll bring them here to the garden and maintain them here. 3, we will look to produce seed from those plants. 4, we'll grow them out. So we're increasing the number of plants with the genetic makeup of the plants from that impact zone, so that then eventually we can take them back out when the new bridge is constructed, and reintroduce not only the plants that were salvaged, but their offspring. And so these photos, so you can see from 2018, which is when we did our salvage, that's the old bridge. And now in 2020, it's the same area, and you can see at least, you can see a tiny bit of how those cliff sides are impacted by this project. And then most recently, also in an effort to conserve and preserve this particular endangered cactus, we have a project going with the Tonto National Forest, because it's the Tonto that this land is on, it's part of. And the Forest Service has asked us to go out and not salvage whole plants, but to sample plants, individual plants, by taking stem cuttings. So that's what you see there in all those bins are cuttings from individual plants, because we can take those stems, we can root them out, and then we will have produced more plants, again, with the same genetic makeup as plants in the field. And then eventually we will use these also to take back out and enhance the population and restore the population of the Arizona hedgehog out in that area. And so lastly, I wanted to share one more tidbit about cactus that impacts work that we do. It's a big concern for us, and it's represented here in these headlines. It's about smuggling, it's about poaching, it's about stealing of cactus from the desert to sell on the black market. This is a huge, huge thing. And part of what happens here is that sometimes when poachers are caught and the plants that they have poached from the wild are confiscated, sometimes they come to us and we take them and we rehabilitate them and we give them a home for the rest of their lives. So I bring this up to say that a lot of times I get asked the question, wow, you've introduced me to the concept that there are endangered plants, that there are people doing, a lot of work to try and conserve them, but what can I do? And so when it comes to cactus, and of course, we're all living here in the desert, a lot of people have cactus in their home landscapes, et cetera, et cetera. And so this is one of the biggest things that I can say to you about what you can do, at least in terms of the conservation of cactus. And that is if you're going to have cactus, whether it's to have on a windowsill, and I have a little cactus on my windowsill at home, or to have in your home landscape, make sure that where you are sourcing your plants are reputable places. And I will tell you that a reputable place is not eBay, it's not Etsy, it's not the internet. Or I should say, it's very few places on the internet that are reputable. There are reputable nurseries here in Phoenix and in Arizona, and certainly at the Desert Botanical Gardens plant sale. We are raising some plants that we sell ourselves here, but also we're sourcing from reputable nurseries. And it is always a good thing if you go to a nursery to ask, what's the source of your plants? And if they won't tell you, don't buy from them. So with that, I will conclude my presentation and just let you know that the garden, Desert Botanical Garden, is here to help you enjoy the beauty of the desert and to care about it. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Kimberly, for taking the time to talk with us and sharing your knowledge with us. As a member of the garden for many years, I did not know about the garden's efforts with respect to, say, saving that endangered cactus from the bridge construction. I had no idea that you guys did that. So thank you. I learned something new about the garden, and I visit often. And I think that I have a 3-year-old granddaughter who loves Desert Botanical Garden. She's the
nice.
family's biggest fan of looking at all the plants and the flowers. So we're trying to pass that on generationally. But I want to open up the floor to our members if any of them have questions for you, Kimberly. So anyone has a question, please unmute yourself and take the floor.
I see someone raising their hand.
Oh,
Henrietta.
Henrietta?
Hi there. That was such an in-depth, interesting report on, especially the Arizona hedgehog cactus flower, the red one. Beautiful.
Yeah.
My question is, are there any non-Arizona plants or bushes or trees that are threatening any of these endangered plants?
That are threatening the endangered plants?
Mhm.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for asking that question. So, and this is another area that the garden is working in, and that's of invasive species. So non-native plant species that have been introduced into the desert that are in our area here and in throughout Arizona, to be honest, that are having serious impacts. The number one problem that we see, the most threatening invasive plant, is called bufflegrass. And it's a South African grass. It was introduced, I think it was back in the 30s for cattle forage. And it is a nightmare. It has been a problem in the Tucson area, in southern Arizona, for much longer than it's been a problem here. And there was a period in which people thought it would never get into central Arizona because of the difference in our climate. That was wrong. And the reason this is such a big problem is, one, it is so, it can become so pervasive and it will just crowd out native species. But the biggest problem is fire. This plant is such a fire hazard, and it burns so hot that it can kill a saguaro. And as I'm sure you are all aware, in the last several years, we have had just insane, incredible wildfire seasons. And we have been out into these areas after the fact, and it is just so devastating to see. We see so many different cactus that are just burnt to a crisp. And it's not strictly buffalo grass, but buffalo grass is a major, major problem. And there are other invasive species as well that contribute to this. So another one is fountain grass. And fountain grass is a big landscape plant that's used throughout Phoenix. I will tell you, if you have fountain grass in your home landscape, I would ask you, please take it out. Because not only is it in your yard, but when it sets seed, those seeds go everywhere. And we have documented it in our preserve areas in and around Phoenix. So it's invading the natural areas. And that is another up and coming real problem. Yeah, so thank you for asking the question.
Hi, this is Frankie James. How do you ensure that when you transplant one of the plants to a new environment, how do you ensure that the soil is appropriate or proper for the transplant?
Yeah, right. So let me ask you, are you asking about like when we take something out of the wild, like the Arizona hedgehog cactus, and bring it back to the garden? Or are you talking about when we plan to take it back out to the wild and put it back out in the wild?
When you take it from the original setting, like
Yeah.
under the bridge, and you take it to the
And
botanical.
we bring it to the gardener.
Yeah.
Right. So every species is its own little challenge. Some of them are what we call generalists, and they will do quite fine in a general, let's talk about cactus, for example, a cactus mix that we make here. We have our own little, what do I want to say? Recipe.
Proprietary mix.
For
Our
cactus
garden mix.
the garden mix, cactus medium. And a lot of cactus will do just fine in that. On the other hand, there are other species of cactus that are what we would call specialists, that grow on special kinds of soil types and so on. And so one of the things that we often do is we will collect some of the native soil from the natural habitat, and we'll bring it back so that we can understand what the makeup of that soil is. And we actually sometimes will bring enough back that we can transplant the plants that we have, taken from the wild into that native soil to keep them going. So it's a multifactorial kind of a challenge. And I will tell you, for me, this is one of the reasons I love my job and being in this field, because it's like being a detective. It's solving mysteries, it's solving problems all the time. And boy, when you get it right, it is the best feeling in the world. Kind of like Steve had when he got that first orchid seed to germinate in his medium. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I had a question about the fire in the summer of 2020 that was just north of Saguaro Lake, south of Payson, that
Yeah.
devastating wildfire.
Yes.
When you came back through, you saw so many saguaro that were damaged.
Yep.
I wondered if there was any survey done since that fire to see how many were lost and how many were able to live,
Survive
despite
it.
fire damage.
Right. So some of our staff have been out in that area, and I mean, we don't have the capacity to do it, a complete and comprehensive survey. But what I can tell you, and frankly, it's really sad. This is truly one of these devastating things, is that I mean, that area from Phoenix, going up to Payson is just such a gorgeous place with the saguaro forest, and where that fire went through. Eventually, we are going to notice a significant change in that environment, because even though you may see saguaro still standing upright, they're the walking dead, is what we call them. They may still have green. They may still even flower for several years, but the damage has been so intense that maybe, in just a few more years, they're gonna they're going to expire, and they're just going to start falling, and they won't be, it's going to be another generation. I mean, our generation time and then some before that area is actually going to recover. And that's if there's not another fire. And it's just, and that fire, if I remember correctly, was a human caused fire.
Yeah, it was a car. I think there was a car that
Yeah.
broke down and caught fire by the side of the
Yep.
highway.
Yep.
So it was, you know, the most devastating thing about these fires is
Yep.
most of the time they're human caused and completely preventable,
Yep.
absent, you know, human carelessness and irresponsibility. But
Yeah.
yeah, driving through there is very depressing now.
It is. Yeah, it is. I'm sorry to say that, but it is. But again, you know, I always try to look for, you know, what can we do? Where do we find hope? How do we, you know, move forward? And certainly being fire conscious and sharing out about that. We did a whole series here at the Botanical Garden of pushing out through our various media channels about fire awareness, fire safety, why it's important for the desert, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know, if you guys are interested, you know, I could pull those things together and share it with your group. And then, you know, I share it with you, you share it with people, you know, because it's such a threat. And the desert did not evolve with fire. That's the thing. And so the plants and the animals in this ecosystem, they're not adapted. They're not adapted to it. I will say this about going back to buffalo grass. Buffalo grass loves fire. It burns to the ground, and then it's like, hooray. And it comes back stronger than ever. Yeah.
So talking about the cactus around Saguaro Lake, or going up to like Prescott, you see lots of tall cactus with their arms, but you don't see any new ones growing, or very few saguaros without arms.
So that is an interesting observation. And I cannot speak to every, you know, area where there are saguaros in Arizona. However, let me start right here at the garden. We have our own population of saguaros, that most of which were planted over the lifetime of the garden here. We started doing a saguaro inventory here at the garden in 2012. So we do it every year. And one of the things we do is we look for baby saguaros, because up until 2012, none of us knew if the saguaros here at the garden were actually reproducing on their own. And the good news is, and it was cause for celebration here when we did this very systematic survey, is that yes. And so every year since then, that's a big part of the survey. It's a challenge to people, the volunteers and the staff who do it, to look for baby saguaros. And then they get the privilege of naming them, which is another big thing. So we know that here at the garden, you know, kind of in the middle of Phoenix, we have saguaros that are what we call recruiting on their own, which is great. We do look for this when we are out in the natural desert, and we do see saguaro recruits, but it is a concern, and not just of ours, but of other researchers in the state, you know, down by Tucson and so on and so forth, is that we don't see as many as we did in the past. Why is that? I mean, no one can say for sure, but we think climate change has a role in that. Hotter, drier summers, and these little baby plants, they just can't, they don't have the ability to survive that like a full-grown saguaro does with its big reserves of water. So it's a real concern. And we get asked this question all the time about the future of saguaros in the Sonoran Desert. And, you know, we don't know for sure, but we see some troubling signs, but we also see signs for hope. You know, it's not all gloom and doom.
Oh, thank you.
Kimberly, my name is
Thanks.
Lisa Farrar, and I have a couple of things. One, I'm really interested in this poaching thing, and I'm curious as to the source of that, but I just also wanted to have us save a couple minutes to go around the table and introduce ourselves, because we forgot to do that in the beginning. So could you talk about the poaching for just a sec, and then we'll go around the table and introduce, so you know a little bit about who's a part of Soroptimist?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me say, back in 2015, there was a paper published. It was a result of a multi-year process called the Global Cactus Assessment. So, and I will say for cactus, the native range is the New World. So from Canada all the way down, almost all the way down South America. One thing that was discovered by bringing all the experts together and all of the information all these experts had is that fully 1/3 of all the cactus species in the world are at threat of extinction, which is huge. It put the cactus family amongst the top 5 most threatened groups of organisms on the planet. And the number one threat, not the only threat, but the number one threat to cactus is poaching. And cactus are incredibly popular around the world, incredibly popular. And that's what fuels the black market. And I mean, we ourselves, researchers out in the field, usually we don't have a field site that's a one time there and we never go back again. Usually as we go back again and again for different research projects, things like that. And sites that people have gone to, and then they go back one time and they just see holes in the ground where cactus have been dug up. And I showed you those few headlines. Those are just a few. We actually interacted with officials in Italy and Chile about a year and a half ago, because the Italians, they intercepted a huge shipment of poached cactus from Chile. And we helped to repatriate them back to their home country. But there is such an incredible demand for cactus. And there's a lot of people who are, you know, it's easy to go out in the desert and just dig them out of the ground, and then you can sell them. And some of them, you know, cactus will sell for $25, and some of them will sell for $1,500.
Wow.
And so that's why I say to everybody who I, you know, get their ear, is to say, if you're going to buy cactus, and like I said, I have cactus in my house and I have cactus in my yard. I love cactus. Always make sure you're getting them from a reputable source, because it is, like I said, it's the number one threat to cactus.
I will never again not ask. I promise.
Thank you.
Fascinating presentation. I'm going to go around the table and have our remaining members who haven't had to leave introduce themselves. Would you unmute yourself, Mary, and start?
Hi, I'm Mary Greer. I'm a retired attorney and community volunteer.
Thank
Longtime
you.
Soroptimist.
Thanks, Mary. Henrietta?
Henrietta Speedy, former CFO for Engineering Services, now retired. Loved your presentation.
Thank you.
And Darlene?
Hi, I'm Darlene Miller, a past president of Soroptimist and new to the desert. Well, not so much new anymore, 5-6 years. But I'm known for my black thumb as opposed to my green thumb. But I enjoyed this tremendously. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And Paula Atkins, welcome from Virginia. Did you unmute yourself, Paula?
Hi, I'm Paula Adkins, calling in from Virginia, and glad to be a part of this occasionally. It was a wonderful presentation, really appreciate it.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Thanks, Paula, and great to see you. How about Frankie?
Hi, I'm Frankie James, longtime member of Soroptimist. I really enjoyed the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Frankie. Lee?
Lee Wales, formerly Development Officer with Valley of the Sun United Way and Director with Bull Information Systems. And thank you so much. And I'm going to be sure to share your information about cactus poaching with everybody.
Thank you.
I had no idea.
And Mary Schroeder, Judge Schroeder.
Hi, I'm Mary Schroeder, and I'm a senior judge of the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, and we've been members of the Garden for more than 40 years. So it's a wonderful, wonderful place.
Oh my
Thank
gosh. Thank you.
And Joy.
Joy Me, retired city planner and planning consultant, member of the Garden. And years ago, I used to prepare and supervise people doing those environmental reviews. And so I appreciate what you're doing, and I know how hard it is to get the mitigation plans developed and actually implemented.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Joy. And last but not least, Terry.
Oh, Terry Flood. I'm a nurse and a member of the Garden. And I have a question. So of all those cactus that are poached, do many of them survive?
A lot of them don't. A lot of them don't. And as I said, we sometimes receive poached cactus that have been intercepted, and usually they're bare rooted in a cardboard box and in not great condition. We're very fortunate here, or the plants are very fortunate that we have some really talented horticulturists who can nurse a lot of them back to health. But that's another really sad thing about it, is that, and people, poachers, and there are many stories about this, you know, they dig them up, they put them in their pants pockets, and then to transport them to wherever they're going, you know, they put them in bags, they put them in suitcases, they put them in cardboard boxes, they'll ship them halfway around the world. And I mean, it tells you something about how much money is in this, that, I mean, people are literally traveling from other countries to the US, as an example, going into deserts in the US, doing all of this, risking being caught, and then shipping things back. And even when not all of the plants survive that piece of things, it's still a big enough incentive for them to do it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you.
I didn't have Margie introduce herself because I think you know Margie.
I know Margie.
But I do want to
I wasn't
say,
ignoring you, Margie.
thank you. I appreciate that.
As I mentioned,
So all of you that are members, thank you so much for being a member of the Garden. If you are not a member, feel free to give me a call. But if you want to know more about the research and conservation, there is a lot of information on our dbg.org website. So feel free to educate yourself and learn more, because obviously the desert is beautiful. And, you know, Kim's very excited, if you can't tell, as our Chief Science Officer. So there's a lot more going on at the Garden other than just the trails. So
Yes.
that's really, really fantastic presentation, Kimberly. Thanks so much for your time. On behalf
My
of
pleasure.
We're thrilled that you were able to join us today. And I'm sure if someone's not a member, they're going to be joining. I know I am. So.
I bet we all
Yeah.
are.
Yes.
let me know. Let me know.
All right. Well, thanks. Great to see everybody. We're a little bit over time, so we should probably close out the meeting, but it's been a pleasure meeting you, Kimberly.
And you as well, all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Great to
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Bye.